Welcome to the Healthy Relationships Initiative podcast. Our goal is to provide information and tools to help you build happier, healthier, and safer relationships of all kinds. To learn more about HRI, please visit www.guilfordhri.org and check us out on social media at GuilfordHRI.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Healthy Relationships Initiative Relationship Booster. We're so glad that you're here with us. And our topic for today's program is on maintaining a healthy work-life balance. My name is Christine Murray. I am the director of the UNC Greensboro Center for Youth, Family, and Community Partnerships, as well as I oversee, as part of that role, the Healthy Relationships Initiative. To tell you a little bit about the Healthy Relationships Initiative, our mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds in Guilford County and beyond. And we invite you to check out our website at guilfordhri.org for more information, as well as connect with us on social media. And actually, just within the last day or two, we changed our social media handle. So now it's at Healthy Relationships Initiative on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest, as well as you can also find us on Twitter. So we're glad that you're here with us today. Before we get started, for those of you who are joining us in the live online program, with these relationship boosters, we will make the video recording available at a later time. But those of you who are here with us live are welcome to submit questions at any time throughout the chat room. And our moderator is Camila Dos Santos, and she will be overseeing the chat room, and she will share some questions with us as they come in, as they come in, or we'll save some time for the questions at the end. And we will share a link to a feedback form at the end of the program too, so please go ahead and fill that out before you sign off. So thanks again for being here with us today. Our topic is maintaining a healthy work-life balance. And believe it or not, we actually have had this topic scheduled since, I believe, since last fall. But the timing of it really could not be any more perfect right now in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, when the lines between work and life have become especially blurred. So we're so thankful to have Alicia Wolfert with us today. Alicia, how are you?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Doing good. So thank you so much for being here with us. If you could, for our guests who are not familiar with you or your work, could you go ahead and share a little bit about your background, as well as why this topic is of interest and relevant for your work?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be able to get to share with all of you. I am, as it says, a leadership, life, and creativity coach. I kind of specialize in, I would say, transitions and resiliency. And I have a background in yoga, mindfulness. I also spent quite a bit of time in corporate America, so I know what it's like to have a pretty high-powered career. But I'll tell you that nothing beats the intensity of entrepreneurship. So I have a little bit of an inclination about what an unhealthy work-life balance looks like, even when you're in your dream job. So so I'm really excited to be talking about this particular topic. But spoiler alert, I think that the idea of work-life balance is a complete myth. So I think we'll get into that a little bit in the questions. But yeah, I have a foundation in psychology. I also am a positive psychology practitioner, along with being really rooted in the yoga and mindfulness techniques as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Alicia. And that was a really great preview and got me interested to hear a lot more of your thoughts on this topic. And just as a kind of personal note too, I'll share, I actually went to see you, Alicia, for some leadership coaching about maybe 2 years ago now, I think it was, and it was really a helpful experience. So definitely can speak positively, personally, about your coaching services and your experiences there too. So we're going to start with just a really general overview of this topic, of what it means to maintain a healthy work-life balance. And, you know, even before the pandemic started and these challenges became especially pronounced, there is really some mixed messages about what it means to have balance in your life and your balance between work and your home life. So we hear a lot about being busy is sort of a sign of success. It's a sign of being a productive person. But then we also hear these messages about just how important it is to have that balance and make space in our lives for the personal side of things too. So how do you think these two mindsets really play out for people?
Oh my goodness. I mean, so first of all, there's two things that I'm thinking of right now. So I think that the most important thing is to thine own self be true. So, we are our own masters, and it's really, really important to know who we are and what we want out of life, because I think that a lot of unbalance, if that's even the right way to put it, comes from not knowing what it is that's truly important to you and getting swept up in what other people want and expect of you and working towards shoulds instead of what is in your heart, your soul, your mind. You are your own master. If you know yourself, if you know your core values, then it's a lot easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's easier to maintain something that resembles balance. I like to think of it a little less about balance and more as a pendulum, though. So I like to think of, sometimes your pendulum has to swing really far into one direction before you realize that it's time to come a little bit back towards the center or even move into the other direction. I think that the main thing with all of this is knowing yourself. And in order to do that, you must know and identify your own personal core values. And I love that you have rocks in the background for this one, because there's a really old video from like the 80s or 90s by Stephen Covey. He did the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's this video where he brings up this woman and he asks her to start filling this bucket, and he's like, all right, let's fill this bucket with sand. There's like everything that people are asking you to do. Let's fill this bucket with all of these other things in your life that you have to do, these small little rocks. And then he's like, okay, now these are the really important things. Can you fit them in there? And so she tries to fit these big rocks in, but it's already been filled up with the sand and the expectations and the wants of other people. And there's no room for the big rocks. And so he said that the big rocks, they really are what's most important to you. They are, family. They are, your values. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your faith, whatever that is. But if you wait and put those in last, there's not any room for them. But if you put them in first, the other things are going to get done or not get done, but you know that the most important things are done first. So I think that it's super important that you know yourself. You've identified your core values, and then you start looking at how you're prioritizing those in your life.
I think that's great, and it really does speak to the importance of knowing what your priorities are. And the more then you can shape your efforts to achieve balance in your life around those priorities, whether it's at work life, in your personal life, or both, then the more you're going to feel that sense of satisfaction. And I also really liked from those comments, just that whole metaphor of the pendulum, because I know in my life and what I've seen in my work as a counselor is just that balancing this work-life balance, it's not a kind of constant, it's this one thing it's not this one thing that you just achieve one time, like, check, I have balance in my life, but that it is an ever evolving, really, process, more so. And it might look one way at certain times, and then there can be other times where it looks very different. Or in one moment, I may need to focus really on my work, and that is what balance looks like right now. And then at other times, it might mean that I really have to focus on more what's happening in my home life or in my personal life. So do you have any other thoughts to share about that piece, around that sort of idea of it being a one-time thing that we achieve, and then once we get it, we are done, or that kind of more process over time?
Yes, I do. Thank you for asking. So, I think that when you invite a speaker on, sometimes you think, oh, they've kind of got it figured out. They know what's going on. And I just want to share a little anecdote from my life, if that's all right. So I am an entrepreneur, and part of why I'm an entrepreneur is because one of my core values is sovereignty, is freedom. It's that ability to schedule things the way I want them. It's the ability to get up really early in the morning and work, take a little nap in the afternoon, and then work some more. Just being able to have my schedule the way I want it. Now, when everything came down with COVID-19, I realized that I had a certain set of skills that were really useful for a lot of people. So I kicked it into high gear very quickly. Even though I already had a lot of other things on my plate going on, I already had a full schedule of super important podcast guests and people on New York Times bestsellers coming on my podcast, and I knew I wanted to give them my all, but I also wanted to make sure that I was providing things for my community. I put some extra writing workshops on. I created a few online retreats to help people, tools in the toolbox for folks, so to speak. And I realized leading up to last weekend that I had not taken 2 full days off in a row since January. Okay, for those listening, that is unhealthy. If you were my client, I would give you a lecture. So I did what I would do with a client, and I sat down and I looked at, okay, that was important to do for that time period. I wasn't miserable. I enjoyed the work that I was doing. It was hard. It was difficult to get through, but I enjoyed it. Now it's time for boundaries. So that I realized, okay, what can I do? I looked back at my core values and I took a look at what's most important to me. I looked at what's happening in my schedule over the next few months and realized that I'm going to be able to, have a weekend that I'm going to take my weekends. I'm going to make sure I get all my work done during the week so that I can take 2 days off. And I'm going to shut down work at 5 o'clock because it's time.
I think that is such a great example because, first of all, I just really appreciate your self-disclosure on that and sharing that personal anecdote. I do think it is always reassuring for everybody when they hear that the people who know how to do certain things, still struggle, because all of these things are not easy. I always say when it comes to our relationship skills that we're not talking about rocket science here. It's not hard to understand it. It's in the application. So I can understand, what I need to do to achieve somewhat of a sense of balance in my life. But then the real world comes in and I've got these demands at work, these demands at home, these personal interests to help have balance too. So, and I think too, I'm glad you shared kind of how it really has been impacted by the pandemic and the shifts and the things that you were trying to do there, because whether somebody's listening right now and currently kind of experiencing this major shift, that's really great and important, but that's something that just happens at all times throughout life, whether it's a sickness, a different project at work, a different experience in your family life or relationship challenges, that whether we're talking about this pandemic or just something else, that balance might look different in different seasons. And sometimes we need to kind of swing that pendulum, one way or another. So you really were working very hard in that one season of your life. And now maybe it's time for you to maybe not just take a 2-day weekend, but I'm going to suggest you consider a few 3-day weekends in there too, because you've certainly earned them.
Yeah, exactly. And I love, Christine, that you said seasons, because I think that's an important consideration. I mean, I'll say I am a single female. I don't have children. And I know that a lot of my friends and a lot of the people that I work with that have children, it becomes a much more complex conversation of how to achieve balance and how to achieve what's important in that season of child rearing, because there's different considerations that have to be made. Balance is going to look very different for you if you have a 2-month-old or a toddler or someone in grade school or in high school. Those seasons are all going to be different, and what you're able to give to work or to your other relationships when you have children is going to be different because of the season that you're in. And I think that that's a huge thing to take into consideration when you're thinking about what balance, what maintaining self-care is going to look like for you.
And I think too, just going along with that idea of seasons, is the importance of really recognizing when what worked in one season no longer works. And so we talk about that a lot from a family counseling perspective, that, you know, a lot of times the challenges that families have is that they haven't adapted the structure of their family or their relationships from one season to the next. So what works when you had a elementary school age child, if you continue to apply that same paradigm as your children enter into the teen years and approach, you know, the launching phase, if you're not adjusting that, that's where a lot of problems come up. And I think the same is really true, you know, for myself as a parent. I can just remember, you know, having this real moment when my kids kind of moved out of that like infant toddler phase, and I just realized that I had been living kind of in survival mode, and I needed to really be intentional about bringing more balance. But during those very young years, there was kind of no such thing as balance. You know, it was really just focused on getting through the day because that's what needed to happen. But if I'd have kept that up for a lot longer period of time, you know, that's the sort of thing that leads to a lot of problems and burnout.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think it's a beautiful way to look at it. And I'm so glad you brought up seasons.
So how would you describe a healthy balance between work and life? And we can talk about that both in the anytime scenario, or if you have some additional considerations for what that might look like right now in this season of coronavirus.
Well, I think it's really important, you know, in the grand scheme of things, our lives are really short. And I think it's super important for us to be doing work we enjoy. We might not love it. It's great if you love it, but if you're doing something that you really hate or really dislike, you're doing yourself a disservice. So that's one thing to look at. It's important to really evaluate, are you doing something that you can at least tolerate and not hate on a daily basis or dislike yourself for doing? And I think that we don't talk about that enough in this society, but just making sure that your work is aligned with your core values. Are you doing that work in order to meet an end financially, from a stability standpoint? Are you doing work that, you know, makes you feel good about yourself, that, you know, helps you root into your identity? So that's super important, because when things get really tough in work, if you already don't like it, it's going to make life feel unbearable, and it's going to make it feel like there's so much weight on your shoulders. So it's really important to be looking at, on the front end, if you can, from a proactive standpoint, if you are in alignment with what you need to be. And maybe you were in alignment 5 years ago, like you said, but maybe you're not in alignment now. And so just reevaluating, are you doing what you want to be doing, or are you doing what you think you should be doing? Because they're very different things. And so I think staying away from the shoulds is important. So that's the first thing that I would say. And then could you circle back that question for me one more time?
I just thought if you had any, the big picture question was, what does that balance look like? And so I'm hearing that one piece of that is really making sure that your work is in alignment with your values. And then I guess if there's other aspects or other layers that you would add to that, as well as if there are any unique considerations of what that might look like right now at this unique point in time.
Yeah. You know, I think self-care is a word that gets used pretty flippantly and gets overused in our society. But I do think that it's very, very important for us to be checking in with ourselves. So we often hear the expression, you can't pour from an empty cup, but there's, I believe, a woman, Sam Bennett, and I can't think of the name of the book, so I'll have to find that for you, but she has a metaphor that it's not just that you have to fill up the cup. You need to fill up the cup for yourself first, and then the overflow should be going to other people. And so I really think that that's important, because you're not just, you shouldn't just be filling up your cup for yourself. or for other people, you need to fill it up for yourself first so that other people can get that overflow. And so it's very difficult to keep giving if you haven't filled up for yourself first. And so you are going to feel burnt out, even if you enjoy what you're doing, if you're doing too much of it, if you don't put boundaries into place, and if you don't get any time for yourself, which I know can be very, very difficult. And we can think, oh, we don't have time for that. But it's going to make all of the people around you, their lives easier too, if you can fill up your own cup.
And I think that really is especially true right now when there's so many added stressors and just pressures that people are facing. And I know that's something that I've been kind of working on and focusing on in my own parenting during this time. I think in the beginning, I was so worried about, are my kids doing all their schoolwork? How much screen time are they having? And I was having so much stress. And so I just kind of decided, if they don't want to come on a walk with me, even though that would be a great thing for them, I need to take that walk because I need to be in a better, calmer place to be able to care for both my kids, my family, as well as even my work too. So I think really putting yourself at the, high up on that priority list and understanding that actually doing that is helping other people and being that model for that. So, of course my kids are watching more screen time than I would like, and I would like to be setting more limits there. But I think that, right now my focus has been on, I'm going to take care of myself as much as I can so that I can kind of think as clearly as I possibly can about this.
Absolutely. And I think understanding the boundaries that are important to you during this time in particular are really important. I mean, so many of us are working out of our homes, which we might not have been doing before. And so it was a lot easier to separate your work life from your home life. And right now that's more difficult, especially if you're not used to it. So I think putting into place some boundaries that are important to you, like I am going to turn my computer off at lunchtime, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to monotask and I'm going to eat lunch and I'm going to chew my food, and really take a mindful moment for myself. Or, I won't allow myself to log on and check email before a certain time, or I'm not going to check email. I'm not going to check my text messages after a certain time and on weekends. I think it's really important to begin taking the steps to draw your boundaries. What are they? And then the other thing is that you have to communicate those boundaries to other people too. Mm-hmm. So you have to communicate that, like, let the people at work know. I think what's coming at me is really important. It needs all of my intention. So I'm going to carve out my work hours during this time. I'm not going to just flippantly check it in the evening and then get frustrated because I can't immediately do something about it. But let the people in your work relationships know that you are going to address it and when you will be addressing emails. And that's important all the time, but it's especially important. There's a huge spotlight on it right now.
And I think right now, even in the context of kind of the timeline of the pandemic, even right now might be a good time for people to really start to think about shifting from the immediate sort of crisis when maybe you were working like whenever you could. I think you might have seen the meme on Facebook or social media about the Dolly Parton, like working 9 to 5 normally, but when you're trying to work from home with kids, it's like 9 to 9:15, 9:20 to 9:22, and maybe that was what was really necessary during that time. But this time, especially since for a lot of people, we might be looking at remote working conditions for a while. I've started thinking about this too. And my personal life is just sort of like, okay, what I was doing in the beginning was really necessary, but now we're, where there was really no boundaries, sort of answering emails whenever they came up, things like that, working on weekends. And so now this has lasted for a long time. So now it's time to readjust. And of course that's timely right now, but that's something that people might think about at any time, and just being aware of those moments when it's time to shift a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously I can relate to that because I let things get a little out of hand even for myself. And so now it's thinking about like, okay, I want those boundaries but how do I communicate it to the people around me? How do I communicate it to the people in my life? How do I communicate it to my clients? How do I communicate it to all the stakeholders that might be involved? So does that mean a conversation? Does that mean a team meeting? Does that mean a family meeting? Does that mean, what is that looking like? And in a family perspective, I think it's really important to share what it is that you want and what boundaries you want to put in place and what boundaries do they want, and being able to have a conversation about that. I'm in a new partnership, and in that new partnership, it's about figuring out what's his schedule, what's my schedule, when can that be together, and when can that not be together. And so that infringes upon our work-life balance too. And so it's really important to open those channels of communication with each other and make sure we know what's important, not only to ourselves, but to the important people in our lives as well.
And I think we are kind of shifting to looking at that next topic of kind of the challenges to achieving this balance. And so we've touched on a lot of those, which can be expectations from other people, difficulty communicating about boundaries, also just kind of how many demands there are, changing seasons. Are there other challenges that you would add that maybe haven't come up yet?
I know that we so badly love to multitask, and we think that multitasking is going to make our life easier. I just want to encourage you to monotask as much as possible, to make the work that you're doing mindful moments. I mean, even enjoying one task at a time, like not eating your lunch and sitting in front of the computer and working, if at all you can avoid that. Just do one thing at a time. That will help you feel more grounded and more centered and a better sense of balance. So I think mindfulness is really important. I also think that, especially given the environment that we're in right now, I think self-compassion is one of the most important pieces that we can bring into this, because, there are very competitive, high-powered careers that don't allow for as much balance as others. And if that's important to you, if your career is a core value and you've accepted that that's a part of it, it doesn't mean that being able to find what feels like balance to you is impossible, but it's probably going to be harder. And so what I just want to say is, when it feels like you have too many balls in the air, it might feel counterintuitive, but stopping and doing a 5-minute self-compassion exercise. Kristen Neff is a researcher out of, I think she's in Texas, and she has a ton of very short guided meditations. Like she calls it this, like the self-compassion break. And just reminding yourself that what you're doing is hard. What all of us are doing right now is really difficult, and acknowledging it, acknowledging that all of us, to greater or lesser degrees, have experienced this type of suffering before or are experiencing it now, and letting yourself acknowledge that it's hard and showing yourself a little self-compassion, it will go a really long way.
Mm-hmm. And I think that does relate to some of the other challenges around sort of the mindfulness. The challenge there is just how many distractions there are, how much stress there is, the information overload. And, when you were talking about that in particular, I was thinking how pre-coronavirus, I have always really hated video conferences. But that's because normally what I've realized and kind of learned to do since this time is just to do the monotasking, like you said, because normally I like to, be kind of multitasking while I was on those, but, and there's pressure to do that. It's how much there is to be done, so many distractions, at the end of an hour, I know there's going to be just a whole long list of emails to respond to. So it feels easier to just do it, but especially kind of bringing in that relationship perspective, since we are the Healthy Relationships Initiative after all, really focusing in helps those times to feel more connected too. And it might mean more work later, but it means maybe less stress in the big scheme of things. Yeah. What about kind of, this idea of burnout? I think when we can sort of talk about so much of what we've been talking about so far is probably more preventive, like things you can try to do, to kind of manage things. But, what are some things that people need to know about the concept of burnout? What to do when you start to feel that you might be getting burnt out on work?
Yeah, I mean, if you're feeling chronically overwhelmed at work, you're probably heading towards burnout. So that's probably a sign of burnout. A sign of burnout can also be, that I can share when I started my career at Lincoln Financial. I was an internal wholesaler. I was in sales. It was my job to help people figure out life insurance, right? Very different from what I'm doing now. But I happened to be good at it. And it was my job to pick up the phone and talk people through how the products worked and how an application worked, how you would submit an application. And I started getting really snippy with people on the phone. And I started not liking who I was on the phone. That is a huge sign of burnout. If you get up in the morning every day, day after day, and you don't even want to do it, that's a sign of burnout. Now, these can be signs of other things too. So again, checking in with yourself is so important on a regular basis. Am I still in alignment with my core values? Is this where I want to be? Is this what I want to be doing? Those things are important. But you're probably burning out if those other things are coming into play. If you're getting snippy chronically with people, if you don't like who you are when you're in work, if you don't want to go on a regular basis, those are signs of burnout, and it can get really uncomfortable. So what I think is important is, again, checking in, do an assessment with yourself. Is it that I've got too much on my plate right now, or is it the work itself? Make sure you're distinguishing between those two things. If it's really burnout, if it's just, I like my work, I'm exhausted, put some boundaries into place. Communicate with your supervisor about what's going on, if that's a possibility, if you have that type of relationship. Brainstorm, come to that conversation with what you think would be helpful to you, right? So you may or may not have flexibility in your job, but if you do, can you take a little bit of a longer lunch? Can you, how can you make that schedule work for you? Can you cut back your hours? Are you chronically, are you a salaried person that's chronically working more and more hours? Can you cut that down? Can you put boundaries into place and communicate that to the people around you, and take some time for yourself? Like we said in the beginning, there are seasons for all of this, but you should not be working without a break for, 3 to 6 months at a time, like longer than those periods. You can't chronically do that and be successful.
So the burnout really could be something that could be a reflection of just not enjoying the work anymore. It could be a result of something else that's going on. It could be, not having those boundaries in place to put the differentiation between work. So I really liked your point about just kind of checking in with yourself and trying to figure out, what is it? And sometimes it's not really clear. I think a lot of times when people are feeling burned out, they're not necessarily able to say like, well, I don't like this job, or maybe it's somebody that I work with that's creating a toxic work environment that's leading. So really assessing, and I've heard somewhere to really think about the fit of the organization that you're working with, the fit of the actual kind of work that you're doing, and then also kind of like you're saying, kind of the views about how much it aligns with your values, and if it's a more of a meaning level. And I think those are some helpful levels for somebody to do that self-assessment.
I love doing a wheel of life assessment. So looking at different aspects of life, be it home, family, career, philanthropy, volunteering, like the things that, pick those main pieces of your life that you think are important. Finances. Do an assessment, on a scale of 1 to 10, how is it? 1 being horrible, 10 being great. Sometimes when you see that written out in black and white, it's a wake-up call. when you have to assign it a number. And then I think it's also really important to write down what's going well in each of those areas and what isn't going well. Because even if something is really low, there's probably something good happening in that area. And even if something's really high, there's probably something not so good happening in the area. So giving you a perspective, it's a way to give yourself a bird's eye view of what's going on in your own life. And I do that, if I'm feeling really lazy, once a year. If I'm really on top of things, it's once a quarter. So I think anywhere between quarterly and annually, that's an important practice to do, to check in with yourself. And if you even begin to think that you're burning out, you probably are. In our culture, like I think about it in yoga, for instance, you tell people, don't push it past the edge. However, in our culture, what you think is your edge is 3 feet already off the cliff, right? So if you're thinking you're burnt out, you probably already are burnt out, and you need to figure out how to step it back. And that's going to look very different for everybody, but that's what needs to happen. And stepping it back might start with taking that bird's eye view assessment of what's going on, bigger picture in your life.
I love that idea of kind of doing that proactively if you can, and not necessarily waiting until you're just already way, gone. Because usually a lot of times when people are really, really burnt out, it's kind of too late. Not that they can't turn it around, but the amount of time and effort it takes to change course after you've been living a certain way for years is very different than if it's been a couple months. So I love that idea. The other thing too that I would add to that is just the importance of having really realistic expectations that, it's funny because I don't know why this left such an impression on me, but I remember probably during my teen years, and that's probably why it left such an impression, but I remember an episode of the Oprah show. And I just remember they were just really trying to hammer home the idea that you can have it all in your life, but you can't have it all at one time.
Yes.
And I really, it's been decades now, but I still think about that. And I'm not sure that I 100% agree with Oprah, because I'm sure there are times in life when you can have everything. But, having that realistic perspective too, that as you're looking at, work and family and relationships and friendship and hobbies and health and spiritual, you're probably not going to be like a 10 out of 10 in every area. And that's normal, and I think sometimes people really need to hear that in life, there are times when, work is going to be going great and parenting is going to be really, really hard. And the more we can kind of accept that, I think that really helps to bring balance too, because it's saying, my balance doesn't have to be 10 out of 10. I think also kind of going along with some of the messages you're talking about in our culture, I think it's exactly what you're saying. The standard is, 3 feet beyond what really is, realistic for most people.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up Oprah. So one thing that she talks about, like with the burnout, is the idea of, your body's going to let you know that things are wrong. And first it's going to be like raindrops, like it's misting. And then it's going to be like the pebbles. You'll feel like the pebbles and the signs. And then it's going to be stones. And then you're going to hit the brick wall. So don't wait until you've hit the brick wall to do something about what's happening, because like you said, it's too late at that point. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult to right that ship.
Yeah,
but
it's much harder.
Yeah.
The longer. We talk about that a lot through the Healthy Relationships Initiative, because John Gottman's research says that the average couple does not come for counseling until they have been having problems for 6 or 7 years. And by the time a couple has been having problems in their relationship for 6 or 7 years, it's not impossible, but it's very difficult to come back from that. And we can really think about that kind of related to our relationship with ourselves. If we haven't been paying attention to that relationship with ourselves for 6 or 7 years, again, it's not that it's not at all that it's impossible to turn that around and have more balance, but it's much more difficult. So it speaks again to the importance of those regular check-ins and being proactive about things.
Absolutely.
So let's talk real briefly about just sort of kind of why this is so important. So if people, I think we all know it's important, you know, but when there's so many more demands and so many things that are maybe more urgent, why should people make this a priority, both in terms of kind of their short-term current experiences as well as the longer term?
You know, I think people are probably feeling right now why it's important. But it's important because who do you want to be in the world? Who do you want to be able to show up as? If you're paying attention and you're realizing that something's out of whack, it probably is, and it's keeping you from being the best self that you can be in the world. And so, do you want your family to get your worst self? Do you want work to get your worst self? No, we want to show up in our relationships. We want to show up in our work. We want to show up in our own lives as the best that we can be. And you're going to be the best that you can be if you're taking care of yourself, if you're checking in with yourself, if you know who you are, if you know and are solid in your core values and can reassess when things knock you down. And here's the thing. If you stay out of balance for too long, you will hit that brick wall, and then you are not going to be good for yourself or to the people around you. So absolutely, either you take care of it or life is going to take care of it for you.
Oh, that's a really great way to look at it. And, you know, just kind of thinking about, again, keeping this to be really practical and as accessible for people as possible. So, you know, we often think about self-care or balance as like going to the expensive spa and spending a day at the spa or taking a week vacation, or, you know, a day of playing golf with friends. So, you know, what are some of the myths about this around like what self-care really looks like, especially to help people feel like it's something that is achievable for them, even if they don't have a whole lot of time, not a lot of money. You know, right now, you know, we can't go to the spa because the spas aren't open right now, you know. So what do people need to know about how to make this more accessible and practical in the day-to-day life?
So, two really important things. So, important thing number one, sometimes self-care actually doesn't look like fun. Number two, you have to go slow to go fast. So, I think that in order to create balance, you have to be paying attention to yourself. You have to be caring for yourself. The word self-care, I feel like it's been bastardized in some ways. And so I think we have to be really careful. It is not spending a full day at the spa. That's lovely if you can do it, but it's, you know, are you making healthy meals for yourself? Are you paying attention to what you're putting into your body? Are you carving out time to exercise and move your body? Sometimes you don't want to do that. Sometimes you know, sleeping in is always way more appealing to me than getting up and going for a run. But the thing that my body needs most, more than the sleep even, is the going for a run, because it gets those endorphins going. It gives me more energy later, even if it doesn't feel like it in the moment. I was interviewing a somatic experiencing practitioner last week for my podcast, and she said, you know, if you carve out 10 minutes a day, every day, to do a breathing exercise or to meditate, that's like you've given yourself like 40 hours of care a year. You know, like it adds up. So don't discount the little things because they add up to really big things if you do them consistently over and over. So, you know, even if you think I only have 10 minutes might be the best pocket of time, because you might have an uninterrupted amount of time, and you must go slow to go fast.
I think that's so good because it keeps it so accessible. And you're right that even little things over time can really add up. And so I think one thing that people can do is really think about the minimum. What's the minimum that I need? And when I started my new job back in August and really shifted roles into a more traditional schedule from what I had been used to, and a very different level of responsibility than what I'd been used to, I actually came up with a self-care plan for myself, and I wrote it on the wall. And I can tell you that there's nothing on there about going to the spa. It's things like take a 10-minute walk every day, carve out half a day every weekend just to rest. And I tried intentionally, my goal would be to carve out a whole day or 2 whole days of every weekend. But I know that's not always possible. In fact, it's not usually possible. So I tried to really keep a pretty low bar for that, turning off my work email at 6 p.m. every night, just sort of things like that, that were, again, kind of achievable goals, knowing even some days I can't reach those goals, but that's kind of my minimum. And I know, and sometimes I can feel like, man, I wish I was able to take a 30-minute walk every day, or 30-minute break during the day to go take a walk. But even if I can't do that, that's a good reminder for me to really have it on the wall, so I can look back at that and say, okay, all right, you know what? I'm kind of meeting my minimums, and it's not meant to add pressure, because we all know, rules can be interpreted very strictly and add more pressure, or it's just more of a guideline. But I think having that perspective of kind of what's the minimum for me, and that's what works for me. Those points might help other people, but everybody might have a different set of things. For some people, it might be, I want to go for a 2-hour walk at least 1 day a week, or at least 3 days a week, or a 30-minute walk 6 days, so it's going to look very different for everybody. But taking time to really think through what's that minimum, and not beating yourself up at all for either not meeting them, or for just being like, well, that a 10-minute walk, what does that do? But really understanding that 10-minute walk for me is something that always helps me to even be more productive in my work when I come back.
Absolutely. It makes you more fresh. And so I love that you created that list, because oftentimes I'll tell clients, like, create your own self-care, like, first aid kit. Like, because, like, as you said, first, self-care looks so different for everyone. I mean, it's the gamut of things. So for me, it's cooking my own meals the majority of the time. It's getting out for a run. It's afternoon naps. For a long time I would beat myself up because I needed an afternoon nap, and I'm like, I'm young, I'm healthy, I do this. Why am I so tired? But the thing is that if I can just get a little nap in the afternoon, I'm so much more fresh and so much more present. And so that's something that looks very different from other people. But allow yourself to understand that your self-care, your finding balance, is going to look different. It's not going to be the same.
Mm-hmm. And what about kind of keeping this going long term? Because it's one thing to say, like, okay, I'm going to, take this walk. And, a lot of people, what's really difficult is not just starting something new, but really continuing to keep things in their lives.
Yeah. Okay. So for me, is it in the calendar? Make sure it's in your calendar, that you've carved out the time for it, and that it's a non-negotiable if possible, right? I mean, sometimes work things happen, or family things where you have to move it. I also highly recommend finding buddies to do things with. So if something's really important for you, even telling a best friend or a very close friend, hey, like, I've not been doing a good job of turning off my email. Can you check in with me? Having that accountability buddy, and maybe there's something that you can help them with as well. Checking in with yourself once a quarter. Like, do that assessment of how is work, how is family, how is my home, how is my physical health. Checking in with yourself in those different areas, giving yourself that bird's eye view of what's going on in your life, so that you can stay on top of it. But the accountability buddies, the checking in, the making sure it's on your calendar, those are all really important pieces to starting as well as to maintaining longer term.
And I think that's great. And especially, I do love using calendar reminders. I'll put my walk on my calendar, and it becomes kind of an appointment that I'll keep. And monthly maybe reminders about doing that check-in too. We often think about technology as something that is such a barrier to work-life balance, but when you learn to use some of those tools to help promote your balance and your self-care, that can just be a very simple thing. You don't even need to think about it, but every month or every 3 months or, once a year, to take that time for that reflection.
There's one more exercise I'd love to share if we have
Sure.
time. So, Glennon Doyle's book Untamed just came out, and that is more towards women, but she poses a question to people who are having a tough time with something, either a relationship or work or whatever it is. And she asks them to write out what's the truest, most beautiful version that you can imagine for yourself. So often we know what we don't want in our lives. Like, we get burnt out because we're doing so much of what we don't like. Make sure you know, or try to figure out like what's that true beautiful version, and start taking those baby steps to get there. That will help significantly with balance.
Yeah, that's a really great point too. And thinking, and again, that too can be something that can really change, because the most beautiful version of life right now might be very different in the middle of the pandemic compared to normally. And that's okay. It's okay to kind of shift that vision too. We have about 10 minutes left, so it doesn't look like we've gotten any questions in the chat room, but Camilla, please correct me if I'm wrong about that. But assuming there's no other questions, I do want to spend our last 10 or so minutes just really talking a little bit more specifically about the pandemic, and just everything that's going on right now and all of the unique challenges related to this topic of work-life balance. So what are some kind of unique considerations for having at least some semblance of a work-life balance right in the middle of this situation that we're in right now?
Oh, golly. There's so many different things that I want to say about this. So if you can separate spaces in your house for certain things, I think that's really important. It's like, I have an office that I do a lot of work in. I teach my yoga classes in my living room. So I do a lot of work from home, but certain spaces, it can help you jump in when you need to, and it can help you create those boundaries. So if there's an office that you can only, it's a little bit of a luxury. Hopefully there's a space that you can carve out, or a closet that you can carve out where you do that work, and then you can close that door and be done with it when you're done with it. Mm-hmm. Give yourself grace. This is so hard. Especially mothers right now, I feel like are being asked to be the teacher, you're asked to be the babysitter, you're asked to be the parent, you're asked to be the worker, the co-worker. There could be things where you could be dealing with a spouse or yourself having lost a job or income, and you could have family members that are sick. I mean, I think that right now is so unique that one of the most important things that you can do is you can give yourself grace. If it means the kids are getting more screen time right now, it's just for right now. You can reassess when things are differently, but it's got to be okay. Like you mentioned, the walk. You need the walk. Make sure you get the walk. They're invited to come, but if they don't argue about it, because that's going to cause more stress and more unbalance. But grace is so important. And move your body. 100% move your body right now, and preferably if you can do it outside, do it outside. We need those endorphins right now more than ever. And so it doesn't have to be, like we said, it doesn't have to be an hour-long workout. It can be a 10-minute walk. Move your body. Get fresh air. Get vitamin D. Get sunshine. And give yourself grace.
I think those are all so important right now. And like you said, even like you can exercise inside, but chances are you're inside for so much else right now that the more you can move outside, even if you're just in your front yard, you're not really having that big of a change of scenery, but the mental boost for that, even the relationship kind of boost, if you can go with a family member or even a neighbor, taking a socially distanced walk can be something that can be really helpful. And I do think kind of setting the the minimum expectations. That has, kind of been something that I have really focused on. I even told my kids at the beginning of the homeschooling thing, I was like, you have to do the minimum. If there are optional assignments that you can do, if you want to do them, fine. Otherwise, I'm not making you do them. I'm not your teacher. I'm your mom. You have to be accountable to your teacher. If they want you to do these optional things, that's going to be between them and you, and just really minimum in every area of life. I think right now, even minimum certain like work-life balance things, like the time I start working or the time I end working. During normal times, I would be, somewhat mortified by some of the, the ways that I'm managing the work-life balance. But it's okay, because right now it's about kind of having those minimal expectations of what balance looks like. To me, it's kind of almost like, did I make it through to the end of the day? Are we kind of at least, not having yelled at each other all day, and got the work done that really needed to be done, available for people that needed me through work, checked in with one friend in a day, that sort of thing, that is just sort of the minimum. That to me, I think, is a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's helped me.
I so agree with that. I think the minimum is so important. And so I hesitate to even say this, but something that can really help with having a work-life balance is having a creative outlet.
Mm-hmm.
And so not as something to add more to your plate, but something that you're looking forward to, something that will help you draw a boundary. I know that in this pandemic, a hobby that I have gone back to, is baking bread. I love baking sourdough. I love the attention that it needs. And that's something you have to feed twice a day, right? Every 12 hours, you're feeding a sourdough starter. And then like, you can't rush bread, but there's been so much satisfaction in giving myself a break to get up and knead dough, or getting up, giving myself a break to put the dough in the oven, the loaf in the oven. And then the joy of being able to drop a fresh loaf of bread on my neighbor's steps. That's a creative outlet. It doesn't have to be baking bread. It doesn't have to be that intense, but even as something as small as maybe like write a haiku, or, something that will give you a little joy and get your mind off work. It can be fun, and it can add a lot of levity to a really kind of a darker time. So.
And I would add too, that that's great to have that as something separate, but it also could be something, it's maybe not applicable to every job, but it's something that we've talked about within our Healthy Relationships Initiative team, as well as something that I've been encouraging other teams within our center to think about is, you can start to feel like a checklist, of your work, but even bringing some creativity into your day. So I've talked with our team about saying, you could take an hour a day of creative time, or a couple hours a week, where you're thinking creatively about the work that we do and other possible directions that we could go. And again, I know that's not something that could apply to every single job or every single type of work, but if there are ways to do that, and that came from me personally, just really starting to feel tired of so much administrative things, that after a few weeks, I was like, man, I feel like, I've just been doing really kind of administrative, somewhat, not, I don't want to call it boring, but a little bit boring, like all left brain, I guess I would say. So I thought, let me introduce a little bit of right brain. And it might even just be, how do you think creatively about a task that you have to do, and try a different way to do it. So infusing that creativity is so important, whether it's part of your work or something that you do connected to or outside of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I see we're really at the end of our time. I can't believe how quickly this hour has gone. So before we wrap up, what would be your biggest takeaway points, or the things that you hope people will most take away from our conversation today?
I really hope people will take a moment to check in with themselves. Like, check back with your core values. Check back with an assessment. Know who you are and what you want, and make sure that how you're spending your time, how you spend your time is how you spend your life. So make sure that that's reflected, because that's going to be the number one thing that's going to help you with, that myth of work-life balance, with feeling a sense of balance. go slow to go fast. The more you can slow down, the faster you can go. And fill up your own cup first and let other people have the excess.
Yeah, those are all, I think, some of the really great themes that have come up today. And I think the other piece that I really heard a lot of what you said that I would hope kind of as my takeaway point is just the importance of defining for yourself what work-life balance is going to look like and letting that be something that also evolves and changes over time. So it's tempting to look to social media or our friends or other people in our workplace, our boss, to say, okay, this is what work-life balance looks like. But really, in many cases, it's something that needs to be very tailored and unique to, as you were saying earlier, your values, your priorities, and kind of the season of life that you're in.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that that's your takeaway from this, because I couldn't have put it more succinctly and better myself.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you just so much for being here today. It's been a great conversation. I think we've covered a lot of points that will be helpful for people both right now, given the unique situation of the coronavirus pandemic, but also really at any time. Because this is a challenge, especially right now for a lot of people, but it's something that is sort of a constant tension in life for many, many people. So thank you so much for joining us today, Alicia. And for those who are here joining us live, Camilla just posted the link to our feedback form. So please go ahead and just fill that out if you would before you hop off. But thank you so much for being here. We've actually got 3 relationship boosters this month. And so next week, we've got our live program. It's going to be on the topic of healthy relationships for same-sex couples. So we hope that you'll join us, and again, connect with us on HRI through HRI on our website and social media as well. But thanks again, Alicia, and thanks to all of you for being here today. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.